Imagine a kingdom sitting at the center of the most consequential diplomatic pressure environment in the modern Gulf's history. Not because events forced it there passively, but because it deliberately positioned itself there, building relationships, constructing channels, reshaping energy markets, and engineering a strategic architecture designed to make it indispensable to every major party in the region simultaneously. Now imagine that same kingdom facing a compound crisis whose individual dimensions would each represent a serious challenge on their own, but whose convergence is producing a pressure environment greater than the sum of its parts. That kingdom, in this scenario, is Saudi Arabia, and the man managing it all is Mohammed bin Salman, MBS. This video explores what that pressure environment could look like, why it matters, and what the strategic response to it reveals about how power actually functions at the highest levels. This is the kind of scenario analysis that Caspian Report, Real Life Lore, and the best geopolitical documentary channels do, grounding strategic imagination in real-world logic. And by the end of this video, you will understand the Gulf in a way that most people simply do not. Let us build the picture layer by layer. In this video, we explore a possible geopolitical scenario, one rooted in current regional tensions, publicly available strategic analysis, and the kind of pressure that historically reshapes the Middle East every few decades. This is not confirmed intelligence reporting. This is strategic analysis and discussion, designed to help you think more clearly about what could be unfolding right now in the Gulf. Stay with me, because the scenario we are about to explore has implications that reach far beyond the Middle East, into your energy bills, global markets, and the future balance of world power. Welcome to Strategic Dynamics Edge, the channel where we break down complex geopolitical scenarios in a way that actually makes sense. If deep strategic analysis is what you're looking for, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. We cover the scenarios that most channels avoid, and today is one of those videos. Now let us get into it. The first layer is the Gulf crisis dimension. In a scenario like the one we are analyzing, the Gulf does not descend into crisis through a single dramatic event. It arrives there through accumulation, through a series of developments, each of which is significant individually, but whose convergence produces something qualitatively different from any single event. Consider the following elements as part of a plausible scenario based on current regional dynamics. Iran's pragmatist political figures publicly acknowledging the limits of a confrontational regional posture. The IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guard, maintaining its own institutional interest and demonstrating military capability regardless of political signals from parliament. Russian political transitions creating uncertainty in the diplomatic channels that have historically provided a backstop for Gulf de-escalation. Gulf states taking unilateral action against Iranian military programs. And mining activity in the waters near the Strait of Hormuz, creating a persistent, low-level threat to one of the world's most critical energy choke points. Now stack all of those elements simultaneously and ask yourself, what does the crisis management architecture of a country like Saudi Arabia actually look like when it is being tested against all of them at once? That is the core question this scenario is designed to answer. Here's a concept that is easy to state but hard to fully absorb. Pressure is the price of relevance. If Saudi Arabia, in this scenario, has successfully positioned itself as the indispensable actor, the one whose relationships, whose intelligence channels, whose energy market influence, and whose diplomatic framework every other party depends on, then it cannot occupy that position without experiencing the specific weight of centrality in a compound crisis. The pressure is not a sign that the strategy failed. The pressure is proof that the strategy worked, because only an actor who matters to everyone gets pressured by everyone simultaneously. The question is whether the architecture built to manage that centrality is adequate to the test being applied to it. Let us go deeper into the Gulf security dimension of this scenario, because the Hormuz element is the one whose potential consequences are most globally significant and hardest to fully appreciate without context. The Strait of Hormuz, in the real world, handles somewhere between 17 and 21 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum products every single day. That is not a number from a speculative scenario. That is real geography, real infrastructure, real volume. In any serious geopolitical scenario involving Gulf instability, Hormuz is the pressure point that transforms a regional crisis into a global economic event almost instantly. The moment Hormuz functionality is genuinely threatened, not just theoretically discussed, but operationally threatened, the price shock to global energy markets is immediate, automatic, and felt everywhere, from gas stations in Ohio to manufacturing plants in South Korea. In our scenario, the presence of mining activity near Hormuz is a signaling mechanism, a way for a state actor to communicate capability and intent without necessarily triggering an immediate military response, creates a specific management challenge for Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's oil export revenues flow through Hormuz. They are the financial engine of Vision 2030, MBS's transformational economic program for the country. So when Saudi Arabia's diplomatic and intelligence channels are working to manage the military posture of an adversarial actor near Hormuz, it is not abstract strategic competition. It is the most direct possible expression of national fiscal self-interest. The urgency is personal in the most material sense. Now let us add the American dimension to this scenario, because this is where the analysis gets genuinely sophisticated and where most commentary gets it wrong. In the scenario we are exploring, Saudi Arabia has made a deliberate strategic decision to limit American involvement in certain coordination functions, to reduce the degree to which American intelligence and decision-making authority is integrated into Saudi crisis management. That decision has consequences. It creates gaps. American situational awareness over specific Gulf developments is reduced. American influence over specific crisis trajectories is diminished. And predictably, the American response is pressure, diplomatic, financial, and through the security relationship, to restore the coordination framework that the restriction reduced. Here is what makes this analytically interesting. American pressure on Saudi Arabia is not new. The relationship has a long history of moments where American leverage, financial, military, diplomatic, is applied to encourage revision of Saudi policy choices that diverge from American preferences. But in this scenario, the pressure has a specific operational character. The Americans are not just expressing displeasure, they are communicating a specific assessment that the crisis's current trajectory requires American capabilities whose restriction has created gaps that the situation's intensity cannot safely sustain. And here's the subtlety that separates sophisticated strategic analysis from simple narrative. In this scenario, MBS does not concede to that pressure. He calibrates his response to it. He provides targeted restoration of specific coordination elements whose concession does not compromise the broader strategic purpose of the original restriction. He gives America enough of what it is asking for to reduce the pressure's intensity, without surrendering the strategic independence that the restriction was designed to express. This is the diplomatic management technique that distinguishes an actor who is managing pressure from an actor who is surrendering to it. The line between those two outcomes is razor thin. In our scenario, MBS is walking it deliberately. Now let us shift to the oil dimension, because this is the layer of the scenario with the most direct connection to global economic reality and the one that your daily life is most directly connected to. The oil fears in a Gulf crisis scenario like this one are not a single unified anxiety. They are compound, multiple distinct fears operating simultaneously and amplifying each other in ways that produce market reactions larger than any individual fear would generate on its own. The first fear is the Hormuz closure scenario. We covered the physical stakes. The financial stakes are equally significant. A closure scenario produces an immediate and severe oil price spike, supply disruption for import-dependent economies, and the kind of market panic that central banks and finance ministries cannot easily contain. The second fear is production disruption, the scenario in which physical oil production infrastructure is directly targeted. Historical events in the real Gulf have demonstrated that this is not a theoretical risk, but an operational one, and insurance markets and institutional investors price it accordingly. In our scenario, the hardening of critical infrastructure and the diplomatic management of the threat posture that creates disruption risk are running simultaneously as two tracks of the same risk management response. The third oil fear is the most interesting from a long-term analytical perspective. It is the fear of structural disruption to the global oil market's architecture itself, the anxiety that a major producing state repositioning how it structures its long-term supply relationships at the same time as it is managing a serious military crisis creates a transitional uncertainty whose friction costs exceed the long-term strategic benefits of the repositioning. This fear is not about a catastrophic event. It is about managed structural change being poorly managed. And the specific challenge in our scenario is that Saudi Arabia must demonstrate, through actual market behavior rather than rhetoric, that the new architecture it is building delivers reliable supply and stable pricing, even while the transition from the old one is still underway. The communication challenge here is immense, and it is happening against the backdrop of everything else we have described. Layered on top of all of this is Vision 2030, the domestic economic transformation program whose execution is competing for the same institutional resources, the same leadership attention, and the same political capital that the crisis management is also consuming. This is not an incidental complication in our scenario. It is a structural tension at the heart of the management challenge. The Gulf crisis, if mismanaged, could produce the Hormuz closure that destroys the fiscal foundation of Vision 2030. Vision 2030, if mismanaged, could produce an economic transformation failure that makes the entire Gulf security architecture strategically purposeless, even if the crisis is managed successfully. The two are not parallel challenges. They are interdependent in a way that makes the failure of either potentially catastrophic for both. How does our scenario's version of MBS manage this compound pressure? The through a combination of strategic judgment, institutional delegation, and the deliberate conservation of personal decision-making authority for the specific decisions that require it. The Foreign Ministry manages the multilateral framework negotiations within parameters that personal authority specified. The intelligence services manage the sensitive bilateral channels within parameters that personal authority specified. Aramco's leadership manages the oil market communication. The Sovereign Wealth Fund manages the Vision 2030 execution timeline. None of this is abdication. The delegation within specified parameters is how consequential actors manage consequential crises without being consumed by operational details across every function simultaneously. The personal decision-making authority is reserved for exactly the decisions whose nature places them beyond institutional delegation. In our scenario, these are the decisions with the largest political consequences, the deepest relationship implications, and the most significant strategic stakes. The preemptive coordination choices, the restriction of external involvement, the calibrated response to allied pressure. These decisions sit at a level where no institutional actor can substitute for personal authority, and in our scenario, that is exactly where the personal attention is concentrated. So, after examining this scenario in full, the Gulf security pressure, the Hormuz risk, the American pressure management, the compound oil fears, the Vision 2030 tension, and the institutional delegation. Architecture. What is the analytical verdict? In our scenario, the architecture is holding, not perfectly, not without strain, but holding, which in a compound crisis of this theoretical intensity is itself a significant outcome. The channels are open, the emergency diplomacy is active, the oil market is functioning, the American pressure is being managed without strategic concession. The institutional functions are operating within their specified parameters. The pressure is real and it is intense, and the architecture was built for exactly this kind of test. The lesson this scenario offers is not specific to Saudi Arabia. It is a lesson about how strategic architecture actually functions under pressure. You build the relationships before you need them. You open the channels before the crisis requires them. You position your leverage before you need to deploy it. And when the pressure arrives, and in geopolitics it always arrives, the architecture either holds or it does not. In our scenario, it holds. And what it is holding toward is the specific strategic outcome that the entire architecture was built to achieve, a Gulf security order that reflects the diplomatic reality of the actor who built it. Please note, this entire video is speculative geopolitical analysis and a hypothetical strategic scenario created for educational and discussion purposes. Nothing presented here should be understood as confirmed intelligence reporting, classified information, investment advice, or factual current events reporting. Geopolitical analysis involves informed interpretation of publicly available information, and reasonable analysts reach different conclusions from the same evidence. Always consult qualified professionals for decisions in your area of interest. If this kind of deep scenario analysis is what you want more of, then do one thing right now. Share this video with someone who thinks seriously about geopolitics, economics, or global strategy. Your share is how this channel reaches people who actually want this level of analysis. Drop a comment below and tell me which dimension of this scenario hit hardest for you. The Hormuz stakes, the American pressure management, or the Vision 2030 tension. I read every comment, and your responses directly shape what scenario we analyze next. Subscribe to Strategic Dynamics Edge if you have not already. This is what we do here every single time. The pressure is real, the architecture is holding, and we will be watching every development as it unfolds.